Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Student Sparks podcast, where naturopathy meets neuroscience. I'm Parker Malev, the naturopath.
And I'm Emma Johnson, the neuroscientist. Join us on this adventure as we delve into the depths of nutrition, nature, medicine, and the mind,
where every insight sparks discussion and debate. Hey guys, thank you for joining us again today for episode 6. We are super excited because today is our first interview. I think we've got a really good episode set up for you guys. It sounded great. We enjoyed talking. Emma, will you introduce our first guest, please?
Yes, today we interviewed Dr. Jennifer Labonte. She is an MD at Inspire Family Medicine, which is a direct primary care office. So she works really closely with her patients and tries her best to encourage the patients to feel comfortable with her, create like an actual dynamic between the doctor and the patient. And she talks a lot about what it's like to start her business, what it's like being a woman in STEM for International Women's Month. And she talked a lot about what it's like balancing her home life and her work life. So we're really excited for you to hear this interview.
So without further ado, here is our conversation with Dr. Labonte. Just want to start out, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, what your practice is like, what your overall, your family setting. Just let us get to know you a little bit better, if that's okay.
Okay. So I am a primary care doctor. I do family medicine, and I have been practicing medicine for about 25 years. I am married and I have 4 wonderful children, and 3 of them are in college now. So one's in high school. And I don't know, I just really enjoy connecting with people, and I just really like building relationships with patients. So that's kind of part of the best part of my career. And I think Emma spent some time in my office this past summer, so she got to see a little glimpse of that. So that was a lot of fun. And yeah, I don't know. Tell me, what else would you like to know?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, it's Women's History Month this month. So I was wondering, do you think that it's important to keep encouraging women to join like the field of STEM? And like, what is the point of encouraging women in this field and like being an MD? And does it really matter?
Yeah, I don't know. I have a special place in my heart for encouraging women to go into the field of medicine. Like, I just love the idea of fostering that and mentoring to them, and just trying to show them that it's possible, and that you can balance family and kids and work. And I think that I don't know, I really enjoy helping to uplift other women in particular. And so obviously, the field of STEM encompasses so many different careers, right? And that spans a lot. And so in my career, I try to help women sort of see a little bit of glimpse of what it's like, and then help them to see if that's something that might be a career that they'd like to follow. The interesting thing about the STEM fields is that things are changing so rapidly that, even if I give you a glimpse of what the career is like at this point in time, things change so much that it will be very different by the time you get out into that field. And I'm sure the same is true with engineering and all sorts of biomedical sciences and things like that. So there is that little piece to consider.
Speaking of, even like now, there are many more graduating classes in medical school that are female dominated instead of male dominated. And I know yours was one of the first that was female dominant, female class. Do you think that impacted how you perceived like being a doctor and being a woman and a doctor?
It's such an interesting thing. I'm so proud of that fact. It really feels like a monumental moment. And at the same time, for me, that was just sort of the normal reality. I didn't think about it that hard at the time, but that just seemed like the normal experience. But in hindsight, looking back, I realized that we only got there through other women pioneers paving the way. And that is really important, because it makes me think about how I can help to pave the way for other future generations of women. And in fact, in my practice, I just took on a new patient. She's such a wonderful woman. She is a retired physician, but she's 95 years old. And I realized, like, what were things like back in her day as a physician? I mean, she really had to be a trailblazer, and she must have felt very alone and isolated back then. For me, I felt very supported because I had so many female classmates around me.
Do you feel that women still face adversity in comparison to men when it comes to medical school specifically, and like out of medical school? And have you ever seen it during your career?
That's such a good question. I think for me, the adversity comes in a couple different ways, right? Like adversity can be challenges, right? For example, if I could paint a picture for you of what it was like when I looked into my medical school class, if I stood there in the amphitheater and looked up into the seats, what I would see is, besides it being 50% women, there was probably about 85% were people that were around my age who had just gone straight to medical school out of college. So we were all in that like 21 to 23-year-old age range. But then the remaining 15% of the people there were a bit older, like they may have been going back to medical school as a second career. And some of those people had already started families. And there were women in my class who had children. And I think about how challenging that is for somebody who has a toddler or an infant, and they are embarking on a truly full-time plus career and studying that is super demanding. And when you talk about adversity, I feel like there's a little bit of adversity when you're trying to balance things like that. So I did see that firsthand. Then there's other kinds of adversity where you feel like the playing fields aren't even, right? So we often would see that in certain specialties. So, of course, this isn't like this across the board everywhere, and I'm sure things have changed a lot, but certain specialties always had a reputation for being harder or maybe cut out more for men. So, for example, we would see a lot more men going into fields like orthopedic surgery or any kind of surgical field. I had a friend of mine in medical school who went on to do a residency in transplant surgery. And that is a field that you don't see that many women in because it's very, very grueling, and they're really, really tough and demanding on the residents. So, if you think about it, a lot of people when they're choosing career paths, they're also thinking about like, what do they want for their life? And how do they want their own family plans to work out? And so sometimes those choices really came down to like what residencies they would want to go into, which ones would treat them well, or maybe were kind to them in the end game as far as like having a family or a career. Not that every woman, wants to have children or have a family, but that was really the reality of some of the things that we were thinking about at the time.
Speaking of the family, I mean, I know you mentioned that you're a mother of four and you're also a doctor, meaning that did you have your children while you were going through medical school?
I did not, and
Mhm.
I'm very thankful that I didn't. I chose not to because, in my opinion, medical school was like a 24/7 job. I studying all the time, and I don't think I would have had time to devote to children, or I would have had to take a year off or something like that
Right.
because it would have been so hard. Now, some people did do that. And like I said, that was pretty challenging. A lot of people would have children in their residency, like their last year of residency. Sometimes things would start to lighten up and they would have a little bit more flexibility in their schedule. But even that was really hard because, you know, we were expected to be working 90 hours a week. And when you're pulled in different directions, trying to, meet all of the goals of your own family life, tend to your children, try to keep up with all of the demands of the job. I think that's really hard. So I purposely chose not to. I waited until I graduated from residency and then had a job in the real world, so to speak.
So, in your current practice, do you ever have to make sacrifices in either area to support one side or the other with your family or with your business?
Absolutely. And I think that as I've gotten older, I've really found that for me, it's important to have a job that supports my personal life. And because I've worked for many, many years with it flip flopped the other way, where I really sacrificed a lot of my personal life for the job. And I think over time, that takes its toll. And as I grew older and, went through my career, I really decided that it was more important for me to have the free time and the flexibility to spend on my family and on other personal pursuits. So I actually really became quite active in designing my own job so that it really fit my personal goals at the time.
And do you have to work for yourself to do that, or do you think somebody who's working within like under somebody else, would you suggest that somebody who wants to have this family life and career life balance to go into their own business?
I think as opposed to it being, working for yourself versus somebody else, I think a lot of it comes down to boundaries and really knowing what it is that you need and being able to express that, and so this spans all different career fields. But for me, initially, when I was working for an employer, I specifically only worked 3 days a week because I knew that, at least in the field of medicine, that there's a creep that occurs. And what I mean by that is that, like, it's not a 9 to 5 work day. So, doing 3 days in the office per week really amounts to like a whole week's worth of work. Um, so that was good. That helps to keep me balanced as much as possible. And then over time, I realized that, that creep was getting bigger and bigger. And there were other pressures that were coming down from employers on doctors. So for me, it was the right move leaving and working for myself. But I think that in any field, any STEM field, in any career, it has that possibility of doing that. Right. And so I think people need to recognize, like, when their goals and visions and dreams don't line up with their job and be able to figure out what's their next move.
Speaking of starting your own business, you started Inspire Family Medicine. How has your time management changed starting your own business instead of working for an employer and having a concrete schedule?
It's much more flexible now. So I get to decide my work hours. And that takes a little bit of getting used to when you've done it a different way for 20 years, and then all of a sudden you switch and you say, oh, I get to decide what hours I want to work. Isn't that weird? And you're not used to that. You actually look around and you think, do I have to ask permission from somebody to do this? And so there's a little bit of shifting that takes place, that like entrepreneurial boss hat that all of a sudden you put on and you realize, like, okay, well, now my time management is going to be a little bit different. And so some of the things that are different are that I now have to make time to run the business, and I have to make time to network and have meetings with other outside people. And so it's not just doctoring all day long. There's a lot of other, like, nuts and bolts that go into running the practice. And a lot of that is fun. And there's wonderfully creative sides to it too. Like when you get to, design things like social media posts and stuff like that. So it's interesting. It really pulls on all sorts of different skill sets. And, getting back to your question about time management, I would say it's fluid. Even though I have set hours, I'm able to much more easily change them and flex them based on what my needs are, which I love.
Throughout your walk of going through medical school and then residency and then eventually starting your own business, have you had any like female mentors or any women that you've looked up to that have influenced that walk?
I have this memory of when I was a third year medical student, and I was doing my internal medicine rotation, and we were in the hospital every day. And there was this one woman, her name was Jane Lockery, and she's still around. But she was sort of the the third year clerkship director at the hospital. And she was really like a mentor and a leader, and we all looked up to her. We thought she was the bomb. And she would kind of like she had this very, very long hair, and she would always wear like these red suit dresses and high heels. And she would, lead us around the wards, and, we'd go into different patients' rooms. But she was a very compassionate and good doctor. And she was also a great leader in terms of emulating how we should, professionally behave with the patients. And I really liked her. And she also showed us like her personal side. So at the end of the year, she would have this big party in her backyard, and she had these golden retrievers, and we would meet her family. So it felt very warm and caring. And we could see like, well, what does life look like at the end of the road, as a female physician? I had one other, actually, this popped into my head. So there was another woman that I was a family medicine mentor to me. I was in my third year, and I had like a 6-week rotation, and I got to work in an outpatient office under this woman, Janet Abrahamian. And she was your quintessential sort of old-fashioned general practitioner. She had originally, I think, come from Great Britain, so she had this lovely accent. And what I loved about her was that she just had this really warm and gentle way with the patients, and especially with kids. And there was just something about her style that I think I took a big piece of with me as I went along. And there's just times when you work with people and you're like, I really like the way they do that. And then you almost incorporate it into your own personal style from there.
Do you think that that's influenced like why you've decided to do direct primary care and like work one-on-one with patients and like try your best to be opening and welcoming?
Absolutely. I think, along the path, and this is true again in any career, you're going to interface with people who you're like, wow, I really admire that person and I want to be just like them. And then there's going to be people that you'll interface with that you're like, I hope I am nothing like that when I grow up. And there were influences in both directions for me as I went along my training. And so I definitely gravitated towards that type of style that you just mentioned, having that warm, inviting, inspiring kind of atmosphere for patients. And yeah, I think it played a big influence in my long range vision of what I wanted people to experience in my office and when they're with me. I love the Maya Angelou statement that says that people won't remember what you said, and they won't remember what you did, and they won't remember what you were wearing or what your hair looked like or what have you. And I'm adding a little spice to that quote. And she says, but they will remember how you made them feel. And I've always tried to remember that, because I think that is very, very true when you're in this kind of people business, right? So that's an important like mantra that I keep close to my heart when I'm at work every day.
Do you think that's something that a lot of physicians are lacking today?
I think that a lot of physicians are caught in a terrible cogwheel or a hamster wheel situation where they're working for large healthcare corporations that have really stifled their creativity. They've stifled a lot of ingenuity and creativity and independence and autonomy, because they're just forcing them to see as many patients as they can and just get them in and get them out. And that is, over time, it's stifling and it's suffocating. And so it's very sad to see that that's the situation they're in. So I don't think it's that. I mean, those doctors, when they graduated from medical school, they came out all shiny, squeaky clean, and full of dreams. And I think that our healthcare system has imposed a lot of constraints that have made it very, very hard for them to live by their ideals.
So is the future of medicine potentially the smaller family-run care facilities?
I certainly hope so.
How have you tried to incorporate these ideals into your practice?
Hmm. Well, try to think of it in big ways and in small ways. And I think for me, well, I mean, first of all, you kind of have to think about like what are my ideals, and I have a lot of them. So how do we incorporate those in? I mean, when you're in business for yourself, one of the exercises that you go through is to make up like a business plan. And as part of that, you'll often list out like what is your company's mission, what's their vision, what are their values. And so when you sit down and you go through that exercise, it's a really helpful thing to sharpen like what exactly do you feel? What do you believe in? What do you want to impart to people? So I found that very helpful. And it's also helpful in creating a culture. I mean, even if you're just a one-man operation, you're still creating a culture for your customers or for your patients. And and so in my environment, I have one employee and just myself, but still it's important to share those ideals and that vision and those values with your employees. But so anyway, the I think the way that it plays out is in the day-to-day interactions, right? Like we want people to feel, I guess, unintimidated. We want them to feel welcomed. We want them to feel like relaxed when they come in the office, and that when they call that they're not made to feel like they're a burden. I think a lot of times when people are interacting with the medical system, they feel a little overwhelmed, like they don't know who to call or who to talk to. It feels like there's a lot of barriers between them and their doctor. So we try to break that down and make it feel very accessible. And so we do that just through our interactions and speaking with people, but we also use technology to try to break down barriers and make it easy for people to get in touch with us. There's also subtle ways that you can make people feel comfortable, right? Like this is going to be funny, but you guys know my one daughter, Cece, and she's studying architecture, right? And in one of her classes, they were studying how there can be hostile designs to certain like certain things in our environment. For example, like if you had park benches that had spikes in them so people couldn't lie down on them or things like that. And so when you think about a doctor's office and you think about how do you make everybody from all walks of life feel comfortable, you might think about like, well, are my seats large enough? Are there, are there things there that make people of all walks and sizes feel comfortable in my space? Is it easy to access? Is there a ramp or a wheelchair access or elevators? So it's funny, like when you ask that question, really you could go in so many directions in terms of how you might want to make people feel and sort of share your ideals with them.
So how would that idea transfer over to practitioners who are working for these bigger companies where they don't have much control over the physical environment? Do you think they can incorporate some of those things?
I think so, for sure. I mean, it's funny. I think about my own doctor, and he works for a large company, and yet he's still able to sprinkle a little bit of his personality in the space. Like he'll have paintings that he's done on his own, and he'll hang those in the exam rooms. And it's almost like people want to be able to get to know a little piece of their doctor. They don't want it to just be a one-way exchange. I think they feel closer and more trust if they feel like maybe they know a little snippet about their doctor too. So I think he creates an environment like that where it opens the door for conversation. And I try to do that too. I try to let my patients feel like I'm happy to share things about my personal life. A lot of them like to ask about the kids and things like that. So I think it really brings an enrichment to the relationship, especially in such a sacred relationship as a primary care doctor. People really trust me with a lot of really personal and private matters. And so we really try to make them feel comfortable in doing that.
If you were to give like one piece of advice for a woman that's pursuing a MD or maybe even just in the STEM field in general for creating this sort of welcoming atmosphere and like communication and all that kind of stuff in their undergraduate years, what do you think the best piece of advice to give is?
I think it's really important to follow your own path. Find out what are you passionate about, and then really go for it, because the sky's the limit. I mean, you are the only person who can put barriers in front of yourself. I think we as women, we have some trails to blaze, and I think there's still some inequality out there as far as pay scales and things like that. And so I think it's really important for us to join hands and really, lift each other up and help each other get to where we need to go. But really believe in yourself. There's a lot of people out there who might say no, or they might close the door on you, or you might get rejections, or you might not get into the school that you want to. But if you are really passionate about something and you love it, then it's really important to believe in yourself and just to go for it.
Is there anything like you do specifically to like lift and help other women like within your field or even outside of your field?
Yeah, I think, for example, it's lots of little ways. One of the things I love doing is, well, we were talking earlier about career day at the high school level. So I've gone several times and spoken to high school students. I've had high school and college age students work in my office in the summertime. I feel like I just want to let them see a glimpse of what's possible in the end, and to like aim big, dream big. Don't dream small. This is not a time in your life to to play small. So I want to try to expose women. And so working with medical students and residents and having them come to the office for, rotation, so they can really envision for themselves, like, oh, wow, I didn't even know this was possible. I want them to see what's possible so that they can go out there and make their own dreams come true.
Are there any questions that like you wished we asked or any pieces of information that you would want to give to anybody listening?
It's funny. I was thinking back on my high school years when I was going into, well, back then I didn't even know what field I was going to be going into. And back then we didn't really talk about STEM. That wasn't even a word that existed back then. And so it's really wonderful to see that we've recognized that there were so many fields that women are underrepresented in, and that there's a push to really encourage girls and women to go into those fields, because man, we have a lot to offer. A lot of times women are really excelling in so many fields because of so many of the characters and qualities that they have. They can balance and juggle a lot of things. So I don't know. I'm excited about the future and where things are heading in this direction. And I don't know, it'd be great to see what happens when your generation is my age.
Right, and we're already heading that way, so maybe we can actually push some of this stuff out there. We can be some of the names we see on the History Channel.
I love
That's dreaming big, but I guess there really isn't a limit besides ourselves, like you said. So
that's right.
you
need those big, audacious dreams right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for all of this. It's been amazing to talk to you. And I know that there are probably a lot of people, both men and women entirely, that are discouraged in their studies, because college in general is just hard. And then medical school and doctorates and any kind of postgraduate education is so strenuous. So I guess hearing from somebody who's doing that, plus their own business, plus having a family, it's inspiring. So thank you for that. And I really hope that those of you listening can actually take some of this home and use it as encouragement, that it's no matter what your circumstances is, you can make your own way. So thank you so much, Dr. Labonte. It's been very
Thank you.
great.
You're welcome. That was well said.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. We had so much fun creating this episode, and we hope you enjoy it as much as we do.
If you'd like to learn more, follow us on Instagram at studentsparks.ep, where we'll post all kinds of information and episode updates.
Don't forget to check in every other week to learn more about what it is like to be a student of neuroscience
and naturopathy.